So I don't think that it follows that if the United States military, or specifically the branches of the United States military, are cults, then all countries' militaries and all defense is a cult. Let me tell you why. I'm Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, former captain in the United States Army. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and then going into the cult of the U.S. Army. You can get signed copies attached here or listen to me read it to you anywhere you get your audiobooks. Okay, so first of all, not all militaries are the same, and there are some important things in my list that not all militaries do. So exploitation of labor, first of all, that's the number one thing that makes you a cult. You're a group and you use coercive and manipulative tactics to exploit labor, to get people to sacrifice themselves, to do all these other things in order to exploit labor, right? So the German army pays overtime. Now, yes, is it easy to get around? Absolutely. But if the American army even had to do paperwork to authorize overtime, it would result in so much less exploitation of labor. If the Department of Defense had to pay overtime, they would shut down before I finished my breakfast. Okay, the British Army doesn't geographically abuse their people by moving them all around the place. In the British Army, you go into one unit and you stay there until you are done with the military. Now, is it for the greater good that we geographically abuse our military by moving them all around? Yes, and we're seeing that good right now because we do not have one active duty military base or unit that has a political, overwhelming majority, right? But we are still asking individuals to sacrifice for the greater good. Oh, by the way, we didn't even start brainwashing our troops until the late 60s, and we haven't won many wars since then. We have exported our military. We have trained a lot of other militaries. So our culty way of building our current military definitely is being used by a lot of other countries, but I would not say that all countries have this. And finally, what I love about this question is that the only cult expert that is not willing to give the military their cult exemption, also the only one we know of with military experience, when I say, no, the military is really a cult, people immediately go through it and they go, well, doesn't it have to be? Okay, then shouldn't we be talking about it? When I realized that the military is absolutely a cult, my first thought was, wow, that tells me so much about soldier suicide, both at home, at war, and when they leave the military. That tells me so much about transition struggles. That tells me so much about how we ask 1% of our nation to be in a cult and sacrifice themselves, which consistently hurts the individual and their families for our nation. But we don't want to have that conversation. Just like we don't want to have the conversation that Alcoholics Anonymous is a harmful cult that destroys people's lives. Have I written in my new book about this? Of course I have. This is my introduction, and it is called Good Cult, Bad Cult. It's one of the most well-known groups in the world, recognized for both its pageantry and its violent missions, and many bodies have stacked up in its name. It uses tools of programming and influence like enforced isolation, chanting, appearance and attitude control, and a unique vocabulary with specialized internal significance to reinforce internal culture. This group is not shy about its design to break you down in order to build you back up. It demands strict obedience, requiring members to swear a binding oath of unquestioning loyalty to the Constitution and to obey lawful orders, violations of which may lead to imprisonment or, in extreme wartime cases, death. Never does it relent in its continual, exhaustive expectations of its members. But it also provides unique learning resources and money for education, has one of the most robust healthcare plans of any American organization, and offers a generous retirement plan. The group is commonly used as a social elevator for people who would otherwise live in poverty. It provides members with an unparalleled camaraderie, a sense of belonging, and the satisfaction of pursuing clear objectives alongside driven, like-minded people. The majority of former members, even those who've been required to kill in devotion to the mission, or have had to bomb civilians or been forced to invade another nation under false pretenses say they are proud to be veterans of the United States Army. Just going to go ahead and hang that right there. What makes a group a cult, and who decides? There are lots of lists, and they don't all agree. As both a cult survivor and a scholar of cults and extreme groups, I feel none of the definitions are exactly right. I think what is sometimes lost in translation is that it isn't a simple binary question that can easily be answered with a check yes or no. A cult seems easy to define from the outside. We've probably all seen a quick listicle of how to tell if you are in a cult. Most Americans with the specter of Jonestown, Waco, and Charles Manson in our recent history truly feel we know what makes a cult. But the only thing cult scholars can agree on is that what makes a cult has many hidden layers and is anything but easy to define. Now we're going to go over to is the Army a good cult? We Americans love the idea of a binary, black and white thinking. Then there's a note about how we're not going to use black and white language anymore. Good versus evil, our destiny manifest, and something we can be as sure of as the fact that we are number one. Since the publication of my memoir, Uncultured, signed copies here, in which I unapologetically compared the U.S. Army to a cult, I'm often asked if the U.S. Army might be a good cult. We need the idea of a good cult because we cannot bear the cognitive dissonance of admitting that one of our oldest, largest, and proudest organizations, one we all help fund with our tax dollars, might also be a high control and high demand institution where group behavior can, and does, trend toxic. If we look closely enough, we might notice that an army, while it may be beloved, is a total institution whose job is to program individuals to conduct violence on behalf of state. We might notice, in fact, that when a military unit goes away to training or war, they are by definition going in for a cultic experience. And I am not the bad guy for saying it out loud. As much as we love our binaries, we Americans also love our blinders. We turn to patriotism rather than acknowledge these parallels and apply what experts have learned about extreme groups. We don't ensure that the leaders we put at the top of these battalions and brigades aren't narcissists behind all that charisma that earns them stellar evaluations. We certainly don't train soldiers on how to determine if the logic is breaking down. We do train them on how to determine if the orders are lawful. If the Army is a good cult, what does it owe its members in return for the exploitation of their labor and the sublimation of self that will, by definition, be required for mission success? What are we failing to see behind the veil of conviction that we are the good guys? From my experience as an intelligence officer at war, I know we don't keep the good guys safe by exclusively studying other good guys, or by assuming that bad things will never happen to us. We do it by learning as much as we can about the enemy. By studying the tactics of our culture's most extreme and dangerous groups, we can learn how to keep ourselves and our groups safe. But this also requires the willingness to accept that the good groups we are in may already share some of those toxic traits, and we may already have lost some of ourselves to make way for group identity to take over. Culting of America comes out January 20th, and you can get pre-orders attached here. So, as I said, people at first don't want to accept, no, the military is a cult. And then when they kind of have to, because, well, logic and definitions, they immediately go to, well, it must be a good cult. And there are no good cults. The conversation that we do not want to have in this country is that we ask 1% of our population to be in a cult, and then we just throw them away when they're done. And I think we should have that conversation, which is why I'm the former U.S. Army captain out here talking and publishing about the Army being a cult. Have a day. Stickers in the shop.